And we've already spoken to investors, both angel investors, but also to VCs, and everybody immediately understands the concept. And everybody's like, okay, why has no one done this before? It seems too obvious. What's going on? So the instinct is to be as public as we can, but you can't really.
Hello and welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast, where we interview business leaders and emerging market experts on business innovations, market opportunities, and macro-level trends in emerging and frontier market countries. Join us for the next hour to dive deep into the world of emerging markets as we speak with top performers who are successfully investing, working, and living in these markets themselves. Welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. Our guest today is Onno Pfeiffer, the co-founder of Diolko. Diolko is a last-mile logistics company that makes use of existing infrastructure in Southeast Asian cities. It's a really exciting startup. They've been stealth until just the past couple of weeks, I believe, even though the solution has been in progress now for a couple of years, even since before COVID. So I'm really excited and feel very lucky to have Onno in here on the podcast as they're getting ready to finally launch and to talk to him more about his really ingenious solution. So I think a great place for us to start, Onno, would be if you could simply explain what the solution that Diolko offers is and what it is that you're hoping to accomplish in the Southeast Asian cities that you're starting your operations out of.
All right. Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me on the podcast. So with Diolko, we aim to be a pioneer in sustainable last mile delivery, where we leverage both on the underutilized city infrastructure and green vehicle technologies as electrical vehicles and potentially other technologies in the future. And what we're trying to do is create a shortcut into the city so that we can transport goods from outside the city where typically the distribution centers are, the warehouses of our customers, and bring those goods into the city in a green way. So traditionally, what you already see today is like for a Grab or Food Panda delivery services that have someone with a backpack inside of a metro or train bringing a single food order. But what we're trying to do is doing this at an industrial scale, so transporting thousands and thousands of parcels in each train into the city, so creating a capacity for these kind of delivery service, but in a green way.
Great. That's really interesting. Yeah, I love to see these sort of ideas that make use of existing infrastructure and are green in that way. So how exactly does it work? Is it just like in off-peak hours, there are businesses coming and loading their packages into some compartment of the train that isn't being used, or how exactly does solution work in practice?
Yeah, so the key thing is that if you look what we do, we're not adding new trains or like a cargo train to the network. We're really planning to create a kind of a hybrid model where we both have commuters and cargo on board of a train or a metro, for example. So what we do is during off-peak hours, we use the last coach of a train and use that for cargo purposes and make sure that no commuters can enter that area. So we keep that separate because obviously it's important to keep the commuters safe and make sure that their journey is not impacted. But what we effectively do is, if you look at today's business models, a lot of them rely on a hub and spoke model. So if you look at traditional businesses, you have the warehouses outside the city and you have these trucks, vehicles, vans, cars going to the warehouse, empty, picking up the goods and going back into the city and doing their delivery route. So what we're doing is we go to the same warehouse, but with an electrical vehicle. We pick up the goods, bring it to the closest train station. We put it on the proprietary trolley that we have developed and move that onto the train or the metro, for example, and then move that as close as possible to the final recipients, and from there distribute it further using, again, electrical vehicles like a bike or a van or a car. So effectively what we're creating is kind of a distributed warehouse throughout the city, something what we call a virtual hub. So instead of having one big distribution center, we create this kind of multiple entry and exit points throughout the city, and effectively reducing the time that you need to spend on the road. So that way you can avoid traffic congestion. You can do it in a greener way if you look at trains versus vehicles. So in terms of CO2 emissions, they also reduce the range anxiety that comes with electrical vehicles because we only need to deliver or use those vehicles in smaller clusters instead of going back and forth from outside the city into the city.
That's really, really interesting and makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to be green and then also dealing with the range anxiety issue. And I know a lot of these Southeast Asian cities have huge traffic problems, so it might actually be beneficial for the businesses to get their goods from point A to point B in a faster time. What sort of businesses are your clients, either ones that you may have signed already or who you think would be the ones that you would aim for and would make the best clients for the service?
So as you can imagine, using the train, the way you want to do it doesn't work for one parcel. So we're really talking about thousands and thousands of parcels to make it, let's say, viable from a cost structure point of view. So we're initially focusing on B2B segments, so customers that have high volumes and do the last mile delivery services for them. At the beginning, we didn't know what to expect. because green last mile delivery, it sounds great. A lot of people want to do that, but when you have to pay for it, it becomes a bit more difficult, right? People are a bit more reluctant. So we didn't know how the market responded. So we first targeted several segments. Think of obvious segment as e-commerce, where we have a warehouse outside the city and they need to deliver the packages to their customers throughout the city. There is also, let's say, retail and wholesale. So it's restocking of the stores inside the city, but also logistics firms. So companies that have subcontractors, but they want to do things in a green way as well, but they might not have the interest to do it themselves. They're very specialized in their own business, but they're not specialized in the green business. So we targeted all those segments. And the interesting thing is that even before we start our pilot, which is being planned for beginning this year, we already signed on 5 customers. 5 paying customers that are willing to work with us simply because there are no green alternatives in the market today. So obviously there are a lot of firms that are experimenting with green and they offer some kind of green solution, but a fully green dedicated service doesn't exist yet to add to the need that they're looking for. So these 5 customers, they're on board, they're very excited, and they're willing to partner with us even before we start our pilot. So we're quite excited to get this response from the market. And I think the interesting thing, especially here in Asia, in this region, there are a lot of people kind of challenge us, like, are people willing to pay for green delivery? And I think from a consumer point of view, there's still a bit of reluctance because it's just costly. And yeah, especially in Malaysia, if you can save, 1 ringgit, people will easily switch over for delivery. But interesting enough, the interest really came from top. So we have companies, our customers, they have shareholders that are pushing for green alternatives. So as one customer, e-commerce sector, the HQ has given a mandate, given all the countries to reduce their emissions by a certain target. So and then they just tell them, fix it, find a way to do it. So that's really a company that's now looking at these kind of green alternatives to reduce their emissions. Similarly, the ESG reporting standards becoming stricter and stricter. So I think there's definitely a drive from the corporate side to bring this to the market. So to offering this kind of green delivery. So for us, it's key to be able to offer a green delivery services, but at an affordable price. And so far, by using the public transport, we can actually minimize our cost because we spend a lot less time on the road, which is the most expensive part if you look at the value chain in the last mile delivery.
Yeah, sure. That's really amazing to get that amount of progress pre-launch. I was a little bit curious about something you mentioned there in terms of the e-commerce delivering to their customers. Would the model be any different for more of a B2C business like that versus a B2B business, or one that would be just moving its own stock from a warehouse into the city? Or is it essentially the same setup?
It's very similar, and it definitely e-commerce, it blends together. And if you would look at, for example, Lazada, one of the big e-commerce giants here in the region, they have their own logistics arm, but they also work with local partners like Ninja Van and things like that. So effectively, they're doing their own logistics and using partners as well, but they manage the customers. So if you talk about last mile delivery, you could either do it directly with a customer that has its own website, for example, or go through players like Lazada or Shopee that effectively control the marketplaces, right? So yeah, we shouldn't underestimate how big some of these players are, and it's really the economies of scale, right? So it's just big volumes to make the logistics costs as low as possible.
Sure. Makes sense. And definitely a huge business in Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia, I guess, where you're starting out. My next question would be, starting something like this that's making use of government infrastructure would require buy-in from the Malaysian government there. So I was curious what the process was convincing them to allow you to do this, since this is a fresh startup without any experience doing this in the past and it's a relatively new idea. I was just curious, how did you first bring the idea to them? How did you get them on board? How did you get their approval to use the transport? And how are they partnering with you in this venture?
Yeah. So it's, as you mentioned, this hasn't been done before, right? It's something new. There's no precedent that we can rely on, even if we're talking about outside our company. Because some of similar concept, they typically tend to modify existing assets and it's just a separate train or a separate coach or something separate from the commuters. But this hybrid model is new. And it's been a long journey, quite frankly. So we started, so as part of the introduction, I did the Global Executive MBA with my co-founder. We graduated end of 2019, and shortly after we decided to embark on this journey. And obviously, COVID started around that time as well. So on the one hand, that was with all the things that came with COVID. There's a lot of negative sides to it, of course, but what helped us at that moment is that the world changed. So if you look at working from home, the e-commerce business booming, and unfortunately for the train operators, their ridership went down drastically. So there was no one using the train during the lockdowns, which you've seen across the world, right? So we have all these train operators suddenly struggling with getting revenue. And we showed up, knocked on the door, and essentially told them, like, okay, the only thing you need to do moving forward is open the doors during the off-peak hours and one coach. You don't need to do anything. There's no cost from your side. Just keep operating as you do today, and we're going to bring you revenue. So it's this opened the door at the beginning to actually, for them to entertain the thought. So this would not have worked 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So this is really, from a timing point of view, made a big difference. So once we got the first discussions going, it was really about building the trust, because in the end, one thing is revenue, right? But it shouldn't come at the cost of the commuters. So some of our key principles is the safety of the commuters, and that we don't want to impact their journey. So we don't want to cause any delays. So as you can imagine, the door opens, closes within 30 seconds, right? So you have a very short time window to load and unload. Similarly, you're moving a lot of parcels around on the station. So it impacts the public, the commuters, many fronts. So then obviously the regulation plays a big role there. So when we spoke to the train operator, we worked together to essentially do several live tests to showcase to the regulator that it can be done safely. I think I already mentioned at the beginning this proprietary trolley. So this is a trolley that we designed ourselves for the specific purpose of using it on a moving vehicle. So we designed a braking mechanism that makes sure that the trolley doesn't move during transit. So we had to show that. We had to get in a third-party independent certification body to have a kind of external view that indeed the trolley didn't move, and essentially build a case towards the regulator that this can be done in a safe and an efficient manner. So that journey, like I mentioned, we started in the beginning 2020. We convinced the train operator later that year, and it took another 9 months to convince the regulator. But they're now convinced, and they will change the operating license for the regulations for the train operator to allow us to operate. But again, according to certain safety standards. So it's not just to make sure that the commuters are safe at all times. But yeah, so that was a very interesting part of the journey to really convince them. And part of that as well is this kind of pilot. So this year we'll have what we call like a proof of concept to do everything in a safe manner as we scale up. So lower volumes to again show them meet certain KPI, and based on that we can deploy it completely in the whole greater Kuala Lumpur area and have the full support from the operator. So that's just Malaysia. But as you can imagine, if we convince one regulator and we can show that this proof of concept is successful, it will be easier to invite other regulators for them to come over and see how it works, see what changes were made to the regulations. And our hypothesis is that it will be easier to convince each regulator as we grow and expand to other countries. So at this moment, we are already talks with other countries to see how we can deploy it there as well. And it will definitely be a lot easier. So they're all looking at this Kuala Lumpur proof of concept as a kind of precedent to move forward.
Yeah, that's really exciting. It's always interesting to learn more about these sort of startups that have physically based solutions. So it's not just a software or something. There's got to be the test runs and all that with making sure things work the way you're promising them to. So very cool. And it's really interesting also that Malaysia is where you start, and then you're planning, it seems, to spread into other Southeast Asian countries. And this is sort of your proof of concept, much like Grab originally did, started in Malaysia and then moved down to Singapore and spread around Southeast Asia. So was there anything about the entrepreneurial climate in Malaysia that made that the place that you wanted to start, or what was it about Malaysia that drew you to that country?
Yeah, so it's definitely the entrepreneurial side. So things have changed. I mean, you already mentioned Grab, right? So a lot of people don't realize it started off things like My Taxi in Malaysia. And back then they didn't really get the support that they needed. So they moved to Singapore. And here the government has definitely realized, like, oh, oops, we made a mistake, concerning that Grab as a unicorn and quite successful at that as well, right? So things have changed. So there's definitely an appetite from the government. So there's certain programs, incentives. So especially as a foreigner, it's not always as easy in certain countries where you have certain local shareholder requirements and things like that, or getting a kind of a work permit. But there's definitely certain programs like MD status for a company that helps you to apply for work permit. That's very helpful. So there's the government side of things. There's also just appetite from the market. If I compare it to Europe, where I'm originally from, so here the adoption of new technology services, it's a lot stronger here. So the willingness to really expand, to do things differently is definitely here. And of course, the growth here. So it's definitely a market that, if you look at e-commerce, it's not a trend anymore, right? It's just part of the daily life. So there was definitely kind of a market that was open to what we're offering. But other than that, from our business specifically, if you look at Kuala Lumpur, also the infrastructure, everybody here loves to complain about how bad public transport is. But in reality, it's quite good. If you look at the coverage, if you look at the frequency, things like that. And it fits actually perfect for what we want to do. So as was a combination of, in terms of product fit, market acceptance, and the kind of this willingness to change, convincing a regulator, it's not easy. And I don't think we would have been able to do that in a lot of countries, for example, in Europe or North America, for example, to change it that easily. Well, not easily, but to do it in a kind of a reasonable time frame without getting support. And yeah, and also on a personal note, I mean, it's amazing people, fantastic food, great weather here. So it's also nice to be in a place where you can also enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely agree on those last few points. So you mentioned that you met your co-founder at GEMBA when you were both EMBA students at INSEAD. I was curious, first of all, how did you decide that this is the person that you want to start a business with? Was there any feeling out of each other? And then secondly, how did you two decide that this was the solution for you to implement and do it in Malaysia? And I guess I'm not sure if both of you were working outside of Malaysia during COVID or if one of you was there, but I'm just kind of curious how that whole process worked and what led you to starting the company together.
Yeah, so looking back, so Johan Gauguin, he's originally French, but he's been living in Asia for a long while. And we both did the Global Executive MBA at the same time. He was part of the Asian cohort and I was part of the European cohort. So we only met each other in person halfway during the program in Dubai, of all places. That's where we met. We participated in several classes together. So we were fortunate enough to actually get to know each other a little bit. So I had to work together to understand, who we are personality-wise and just fit. And I think also, let's say, this discussion that we had about our respective industries and the frustrations in terms of, okay, why are we doing, shipping boxes from A to B the same way we've been doing for the last 50 years and getting the same kind of response, that really triggered the idea to, okay, let's just kind of work out this idea and see what comes out of it. But I think ultimately, if you look at two co-founders, it's a big decision, right? I spend more time with Johan than I spend sometimes with my wife, just because we're working on a startup. So it's a big commitment. But I think early on we realized that we're actually quite complementary. So in terms of skill set, also in terms of personality, things like that, which was, I think, very important for us because then we're the two of us. Entrepreneurship is a very lonely road sometimes, especially at the beginning. So if you're exactly the same, it can get quite boring, I think. But we're able to motivate each other, drive each other, amplify our strengths, kind of fill in the gaps in terms of weaknesses. So it just clicked from that point of view. But in terms of the decision, it only happened after we graduated. So just at the time of COVID, where we realized, okay, idea was great. We had a great response. We had done already some interviews with prospective customers. So there was definitely appetite. So we figured, okay, let's just do this. But obviously with COVID and me living in Europe at that time, it seemed maybe not like the best thing to do. So Johan was already living in Kuala Lumpur, but two founders, different time zones, different continents. Everybody told us it's, you shouldn't be doing that. But because of COVID, actually all our customers, all our partners, they were doing their meetings online. Everybody was working from home. So I was able to be part of all the meetings and everything while being in Europe. Just need to consider time difference, right? But other than that, we were able to work together and at least build up the relationship with the customers, with the train operator, with the regulators remotely. So there was a bit of luck there. And then, there's a moment when things become more and more serious, when we had to do the live tests with the operator. Obviously, I needed to be on the ground. But even there, like in Malaysia, we had quite a strict, that was called the movement control order, the MCO. It's kind of a lockdown. I wasn't even able to enter the country. So it's only earlier last year that I was able to move here and be in a country. And obviously now it's a lot easier face-to-face meetings and build a relationship. But I think during this remote working, it tends to be a bit more difficult also with your co-founder to build that kind of relationship to really work together. But we realize, okay, if we're able to do this remotely, then we should also be able to do it in person. And so far, it's going well. We're still the two of us. We'll be expanding our team, of course. But so far, it was, I think, a good choice. But Indeed, it's not an easy choice to find the right partner to do something like this, especially remotely. But it's doable. It comes with challenges, but it's definitely doable.
Sure. Have you noticed any changes in terms of work style or productivity since you've been together in person, or has it basically continued about the same as it was when you were both in two different time zones?
For sure. And I think it's not necessarily in terms of our personality, but I think it's more in terms of the culture and the setting that we're in. So I'm part Dutch, part Swiss. So as you can imagine, in Switzerland and the Netherlands, it's a bit more punctual. You do what you say, but you have an agreement, and then just move on. So me going to Malaysia, it was a bit of a difference. Whereas Johan he's French originally, but he's been here in the region for 15 odd years. So for him, this was quite normal. So I definitely had to readjust, also manage my expectations in terms of how things go. And it's from simple things in terms of meetings, being on time, certain agreements and things like that. But that's part also the attraction why I want to do this, because I actually enjoy it. And it's part of the whole journey. But it's definitely something that we had to work together, and it did make it easier that Johan was already here. So understanding the culture and how to work with certain partners, because especially government-linked companies, it's something different if you have a business-to-business kind of conversation where you have similar interests. But with government-linked companies, it's not about just making a profit, right? There's also the public interest. Fortunately enough, we are in the green sustainability space, so it really hits the green part. We're also focusing on local labor, so really having a Malaysian company with Malaysian workers, so just creating jobs here as well, and also partnerships with local universities in terms of development that we do. All the technology that we develop is being done in Malaysia itself. So all those things really hit the right tones when talking to public institutions. But yeah, there's definitely the cultural adaptation that you need, and it's good to have a partner that you have with you on the journey.
Oh, that's awesome! It's great to be able to go into a country and create jobs there. That's got to be extremely rewarding. Did you have the plan to start a business when you went into GEMBA? Like, was it the goal to be an entrepreneur, or did this just seem like such a good option that you did it?
I think like many people, either doing the full-time MBA or like the global executive MBA, a lot of people tend to be on a crossroad. They did certain things for a few years, and then they realized, okay, this is really what I want to do. So in my case, I was at a part of a consulting firm, then moved into an industry, more on the corporate side, and always within the logistics industry. But there always something was bugging me, and I always wanted to start a new business, but I never had the idea, and always had stopped myself, always made up excuses on why I shouldn't do it because reason X, Y, Z. But the executive MBA program was, for me at that moment, the right moment to kind of reflect on what I like, what I don't like, what I want to do. So already at the very beginning, I realized I want to move to Asia, go to a different region, expand my boundaries, get out of my comfort zone. So also in terms of industry, being open to either just go to a different industry, different functions, things like that. So essentially to make 3 different moves at the same time. So the plan was there. Obviously, how I got there kind of changed along the way. So at the beginning, I was applying for jobs, and so I knew I wanted to go into the startup scene, still within the logistics, because it helps if you have long history in a certain industry to leverage that. So actually to come in as more as a kind of, not as an advisor, but kind of the expert and help startups like that. And so I built up my network in the region, Singapore primarily, but then obviously COVID hit, and also realized like, okay, there's not much going to happen. So in parallel, this whole idea of Diolko came along, and then I realized actually why not? Why stop myself and put everything on hold because of COVID? Let's just go for it. So let's say roughly the direction was clear that I wanted to go here, but the path to get here wasn't as planned. But that's pretty much always been my life, to have a kind of a rough idea, but not over planning things. So this opportunity came up, and I went for it, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's how life is, and some of the best things come about that way. You aren't planning them exactly, but it's aligned with your ultimate goal. Why did you choose to spend the first years in stealth mode, and how was that experience running a stealth mode startup?
So yeah, stealth mode, it's not an official kind of standard, just like being under the radar. But for us, we're in a highly competitive market. It's a red ocean for sure. Logistics, there's many startups. The barriers to entry are quite low. So we realized, okay, we need to have a first mover's advantage, because a train operator, You don't want to have too many companies on your trains at the stations, things like that. So it was key for us. And we were also dealing with regulation. So we also realized, okay, by the time we get the regulators on board, a lot of time will pass. So the first movers advantage was key for us. And we realized, okay, so let's first get the conversation going with the train operator, get the regulators on board, start talking to our customers so that we have enough momentum. So it's more difficult for someone else that has more resources than like early stage startup as we do to actually get our foot in the door. In parallel as well is that we're dealing with our own proprietary technology. And we wanted to patent that as well. And there you also always have the issue that if you put something in the public domain, you can't really patent it anymore. So how do you deal with technology that takes time to develop? And you don't know which market you're going to go to, so you can't just apply a bunch of patents in random countries, right? So there needs to be some kind of strategy, but how do you do that when you haven't even started operating it yet? So it was always this kind of balancing game between initiating certain things. So how do we approach customers without having a public website or being able to share a lot of things in the news and things like that? So how do you attract those customers? How do you attract people to support your business? And similarly, also, we have technology. How do you develop that without putting it on a train for everybody to see and then potentially causing issues from a patenting point of view? So for us, it was key. It is challenging because my instinct is to shout everything from the top of the roof, right? Like, hey, this is what we're doing, especially the green sustainability, the use of underutilized city infrastructure, also in the e-commerce. It's just a very interesting space. And we've already spoken to investors, both angel investors, but also to VCs, and everybody immediately understands the concept. And everybody's like, okay, why has no one done this before? It seems too obvious. What's going on? So the instinct is to really to be as public as we can, but you can't really. So you have to really find a balancing game there. So that also means, from sales point of view, very targeted approach. We leverage our network. So usually you have marketing, you're able to show who you are and then get some interest from customers, right? In our case, we had to get the entry into a company that otherwise wouldn't speak to an unknown company, right? So that's where our network really played a role in this region to at least get that first conversation going, because once they understand what we're doing, they're quite excited. So how do you get across that bridge, so to say? And the same thing with talent, like how do you convince people to work for you if they don't know what you're doing and the purpose of the company is, right? So it's always a balancing game. But now with proof of concept that we're going to launch soon, we have enough momentum to keep on going. So now we're going out of stealth mode, and makes it a lot easier. And it's more fun to be able to talk about things that you're doing. But it wasn't a necessary part for us, for our company. But obviously, it's not necessary for all companies. So I think everybody will need to decide for our own business, does it make sense or not? Because there are pros and cons to it. And there's not one solution that fits all, so to say.
Sure. And just to clarify, have you raised money yet? I mean, you mentioned talking to VCs. Are you pre-seed or seed?
Yeah. So right now we've raised with angel investors. And we've spoken to VC. So we have one micro VC that has invested into us. So technically it's pre-seed where we're at right now. So we raised 200,000 USD. We're still raising a bit more to finance the proof of concept. And especially in the current weather or the current climates, everybody is okay. 12 months of runway is not enough, 18, maybe 24 or even more runway. So we're still raising funds. But key thing for us is this proof of concept. So all the VCs that we've spoken to, they all love the concept, but they're like, okay, we need to see some data, show us the traction. So this proof of concept, which is about 4 to 6 months, where we want to show, okay, all these customers that we've been talking about, they're with us and we can grow from 0 to about 1 million ARR with those customers, and we can show that. And that kind of track record we need to show. Because again, things have changed. So just an idea is not enough anymore. So you need to have more proof to show what you're able to deliver. And especially in our case, we're dealing with hardware, we're dealing with government, we're dealing with a lot of staffing and things like that. So we're not the typical SaaS kind of company. So it makes it more difficult to raise funds for sure. But yeah, that's part of the challenge, right? But again, the sustainability, green, the using the public infrastructure, those are things that are definitely of interest to investors at this moment. So I'm confident that we will find the way, but it's really about this proof of concept. And for us, it's a good moment to walk the talk. To really show what we're able to do.
Sure. Yeah. No, really, really interesting. And yeah, I think it's, the COVID and now the current situation, it's been an interesting time to be starting a business. In terms of timeline, did you have investment first and then government approval, or was it one came before the other?
So initially we were bootstrapped because, let's say the first year or so. That's more the kind of ideation phase. We're just kind of working out, kind of setting up the business model, see how we can work, build up the relationship with the train operator. So we were able to do that ourselves, and we didn't really want to sell something before having something more tangible, right? So, and then the regulator is a very clear example that if you don't have the approval, then you can't exist, right? Or there's no purpose to exist. So we bootstrap first, build enough relationship with the operator, with the regulator. We convince the regulators, and then afterwards we start raising initial funds with investors. There's another advantage of INSEAD in terms of the network. There's a lot of investors inside the INSEAD network. So we have actually most of our investors are from or through INSEADs one way or another. And people that just really believe the idea, because we haven't started yet. We don't have to prove a concept. So you need investors that like the idea, that believe the founders are the right people. So fortunately, we have the industry experience. The pedigree for INSEAD, like all these kind of things really help to as founders, to give them confidence that we're also able to deliver on what we promise. But then it's just raising enough to finance the proof of concept, and then with that go to institutional investors. But yeah, this will be very difficult to ask for money if you don't have regulatory approval yet. So for the listeners, if you're going to a similar situation where you're dealing with regulators, it's really a matter of trying to bootstrap as long as you can get the confidence, because once you have the regulator on board, it's an amazing selling point. Especially in Malaysia, I've mentioned before, Johan and myself, or one French, one Dutch, we're not Malaysian. So a lot of people still don't believe that we actually convinced the regulator to do this. So that's a huge selling point. So although in the stealth mode, we're not able to promote as much, but these kind of selling points are huge. And that makes a difference, similar to getting the customers on board before even starting the pilot. So that's kind of what triggers, and that's what we use for investors as well, to really show that, okay, we're doing things differently, and there's definitely something here that would be of interest to them.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And in terms of, say, your first business partnerships or clients, were those also through the network, or how did you approach them, reach out to them all? So
it's mostly for the networks. And again, because the stealth mode, we couldn't really promote, or it's not the typical kind of sales funnel, but also because we're B2B focused. So we're not really targeting consumers. So it's really, so to give a context, so for the pilot, we're trying to reach 4,000 parcels per day. So that's a lot actually, but we just need 5 B2B customers to manage that. So it's really, it's this kind of longer sales cycle that we have to go through. But how do you do that if you're not able to show what you've done so far, if you're not able to promote yourself as much as you would like to? So the network was key in there. And we had several people in the region that really liked the idea, and they were also struggling in their companies with the pain points that they had, so that they wanted to go green, because either from the shareholders, or it's a lifestyle that, if you're selling healthy lifestyle products and then you're using traditional vehicles that emit a lot of greenhouse gases, then it doesn't really fit that image as well. So there were people that genuinely believe like, hey, something needs to be done differently. And they helped us to open a door. And then once the door is open, then it's really up to the startup to convince them, okay, this product fits into what they're looking for. But getting that door opening, that was the network was key in that. Also because, for example, for me, I didn't have the network in Europe. So I had my network in Europe, but not as much in the region, right? So we almost started from a clean slate there. So in our case, the INSEAD network definitely helped, but it doesn't have to be for your school, right? There's always somebody that that knows someone else. And it's just getting this one discussion going. And if there's a fit, then it will go from there. So the cycle itself, from once we were inside, it was pretty standard and it followed the normal process. So it's really about getting a foot in the door.
What would you say your ultimate goal is? Like in 5 to 10 years, what would success be for Diolko?
To actually show that the last mile delivery can be done in a greener way. I do think the transportation industry has quite a bit of a negative reputation if you talk about greenhouse gases and emissions. But yeah, I'm not gonna try to defend it, but it's in the end it's a necessity, because everybody still needs food, everybody still needs to have clothes and other things. So it's part of global economy. So I don't think we can do without, but I do think we can do things better and more efficiently. So we're not just doing things green, but we're also changing the way of operating. So the operating model, so not having a big warehouse, but using the kind of empty space in the city, things like that. So if we can show that and not just have it in Malaysia, but deploy it in Southeast Asia and also other regions, I think pretty much everybody every region. And it doesn't have to be just tram and trains, right? But anywhere where there's underutilized city infrastructures to just use that for different purposes, that would be great to show that it can be done.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn.